Hi, I'm James. Let's take a look at how to use the MapBox Map plugin from Zeroqode. Just before we jump into it, if you need any help building your app or product, feel free to reach out to our team by visiting our website at zeroqode.com. We're the largest maker of plugins for Bubble, as well as the top gold tier Bubble agency. We have almost 10 years of experience and can help you build any web, mobile, or AI product, or even help automate your business. While you're there, make sure you check out zeroqode.com/plugins. This is the full list of all the plugins we make, and there's like over 700 of them. So there's something there to cover pretty much everything your app could possibly need to do. For example, there's Stripe Marketplace Express. This helps you accept credit card payments on your app. There's MapBox Maps, and this gives all sorts of maps functionality. This one's really good for saving on Bubble's hosting costs. This is AWS File Uploader, so you can store your files on your own S3 bucket. There's Air Calendar, there's Air Chat and Messaging. There's so many more there, so definitely explore that and check that out. All right, so the MapBox Maps plugin for Bubble allows you to have a fully customizable, fully functional map application within your application. So this works with the MapBox Map, and you get all the functionality from MapBox directly in your Bubble app. This means you can work with your database, you can work with Bubble workflows and actions, and have this fit and work within your existing app completely seamlessly. There are a few things to look at here on the plugin page before we get started. The first is the live demo here. I'll click this button here. This will open up a pre-made Maps application or pre-made Bubble application with the Map plugin already installed. And we've added a huge amount of functionality into this demo. So you can play around and try the directions. You can fully interact with the map. You've got all the tools set up here. You've got all the map styles. You've got routes and markers and all the functionality that comes with this app already pre-made for you to test out from a user's point of view to make sure it does what you're wanting it to do. Now, similarly, right next to it, you've got the demo editor button. This opens the Bubble editor with the exact app we just saw, all fully installed, but from the kind of editor point of view, so you can go in and pull it apart and see how it works and how it's built and how it's all linked up with workflows and database items and how everything all fits together. It's really useful for testing functionality before installing it yourself. Now, the last thing, super important, is the documentation link here. Now, this app does a lot, so you want to make sure you're referencing this here. This gives you instructions on how to actually install the app, how to get your API key from MapBox, and then there's a list of all the workflows and actions and elements you can be playing around with and customizing and adding to the app. So each one of these opens up and has a visual example of what this looks like within the properties panel, and then what all the parameters talk about and mean. So it's super comprehensive. There's a lot it can do. Have a read through here. And this will give you all the information as to what the plugin does, what you can do with the map, and how it works, and if it works for your specific use case. But let's jump in and build something basic together and get this set up together. First thing we should look at is how to actually get the plugin into your app. So from your main Bubble editor here, jump over to the left on the plugins panel here. And in the top right, click on Add Plugins. In the search field, let's type in MapBox Maps. And you'll see this one here. MapBox Maps by Zeroqode. Now, you've got two options here for installing this app. You've got a one-off payment, or you can pay per month. Now, paying per month is the most cost-effective way to try these out, as you're only charged for the days you have the plugin installed. So if it's $9 per month here, and you only install it for 1 day to test it out, you'll charge $9 divided by 30 days in that month, and then you can remove it and only be charged for that 1 day on a pro rata basis. So super risk-free, easy way to test this out. All right, I'm not going to install because I've already got it installed, but you'll click install there and you'll then see it in your plugins list. So there's a second step you'll need to do with this plugin. I'll click on the plugin here, MapBox Maps, and if you scroll down, you'll see here, you'll need to put API keys in here from MapBox so that the plugin can connect to MapBox's service and functionality. So the way to do this, if we go to our documentation here that we saw in the previous plugins page, the first step here is how to set up on MapBox's side of things. So you go to this address, create a free account with MapBox, and create an access token. You'll see that right there on the main page there of MapBox. Once you have that token, you want to paste it in both spots here, API key and API key dev. And this will mean this API key will work with your live application and with your development version of application as you're building the app. And that's about it. Once you have the plugin installed, once you've got a MapBox account, and once you've pasted that API key in those two spots, we can start building. All right, so once you have the plugin installed, you'll see this new element on the left here called MapBox Map. I'm going to just drag that right onto my canvas. And from here, we can see a bunch of the options and parameters and controls we have to customize how our map looks and behaves. So let's have a look at a couple of these here and then go into some details with all of them. So the top section, the first section, sort of our general settings. So the first is, your UI position and UI behavior. Now we'll see what this looks like in a moment, but by default, it's set to the top left and it's set to driving as our default settings. We've got a bunch of other options here around route instructions, navigation controls, again, where more UI elements are positioned. So the actual controls for zooming in and out are set to the top right by default. Your language and, this one's important, the theme you can select here. So there's a bunch of different ways you can make your app look by default. So find the one that suits the way your app feels and behaves and the actual use case of what you want your map to be doing. The default zoom is important. This sets how close to the map, how zoomed in you are when your map loads. And these two are very important as well, your initial longitude and your initial latitude. So basically, where is the map positioned when it loads on your page? Past that, we've got a bunch of styling options around your route styles, your actual points and how all the paths that get mapped on your map look and behave, what style the sky is, and then we can look at live tracking data as well in there. So that's step one, getting the map on your canvas and modifying everything here to make this look and behave the way you want it to fit best within your app. And of course, our standard layout controls will apply in terms of width and where it's positioned on the page. So set all that up there. And let's have a look at adding some actual functionality and some behaviors to this map. Okay, let's have a look at some example workflows and actions that can be done with this plugin. We're going to look at a few of these here. Now, this plugin does a lot there. It's incredibly powerful, and there are so many different things that map apps can do and, the roles that fill in different apps. So I'm going through the relative basics here. We're going to look at adding markers, moving markers around, different views of the map, having a database of markers, just to get the ball rolling and get you started with setting up a map in your app. But do make sure you go through the documentation for the full functionality of what this plugin can do and what you can do with a map within your app with more advanced functionality once you have this all set up. All right, let's have a look. So what I've done here, I've made a page in my app and I've just dragged the map on just as we saw, and I've adjusted just a couple of things, nothing too crazy here. All I've done, I've kept all the UI stuff the same, but I've just set a default zoom and I've set an initial longitude and latitude to where I am here in Sydney. So let's see what that looks like. A preview, and here we are. Welcome to Sydney. So we have our map here. We're set right where we want it to be. We're zoomed in as far as we set, and we're directly over the Sydney city. I think we move over here. We have, there we go. We've got the Opera House here. We've got the Harbour Bridge here. Looking good. So I'm going to go back to my editor here. So let's have a look at the two UI options. I actually had that one disabled. I'm going to enable that again so we can see what it looks like. So we have UI position in the top left, as it says here, and we have nav controls in the top right. Let's refresh and see what that looks like. Here we are. So by default, the plugin has driving, or not necessarily driving, just directions controls in the top left here. So we can have a starting point, an ending point, and then we can choose what method of transportation we're doing, whether that's driving, walking, cycling, or just general traffic information. On the top right here, we have our zoom controls, obviously to zoom in and out here, and then we can rotate as well by clicking and dragging. And we can set the setting to, if we scroll up and down, to zoom in and out, which we can see here. So we have our turning on and off the UI in the top left. We have turning on and off the navigation controls. And we have the option down here for zooming on scrolling. So we get to control all the UI around our map and the behavior with interacting with the map itself. Okay, so let's have a look at these buttons I have along the top. So like I said, these are just basic adding markers, moving markers around, controlling the pitch and the view of the map itself. So let's see what they are in the live app itself before we jump into how they're actually set up. First of all, adding a marker. I click that, it shows a pop-up and says what's your latitude and longitude. And then we click add marker and it'll place a marker on the map and fly the map right over to where that marker is. Nice and simple. Adding a draggable marker will do exactly the same thing, except the marker that's placed we can then move around and reposition ourselves as the user interacting with the map. Turning 3D buildings on and off will turn the 3D buildings on and off. There we go, we can see that, and we can see that here. And if we keep the 3D buildings on and we turn 3D mode on, we can now see that we're flying through 3D buildings as if we're in a video game. Lots of fun. So let's see how these are set up. Oh, there's one other thing as well. I've got some points that are loaded by default here on the map without us having to manually add these markers in. So they're coming from our database, and we'll look at how to do that so that we have preloaded markers on our map when the page loads. Let's jump in and check it out. All right, so the very first one, adding a marker, that button there, add a marker, will open up pop-up A that I have here. This is just standard bubble pop-up, and I've just put 2 inputs and a button in this pop-up. Input 1 I've called input latitude, second input I've called input longitude, and then this is just our standard button. The important thing to remember here when adding in the latitude and longitude for these markers on the map is to set the format to decimal. So integer won't work. You need to specify decimal as, latitude and longitude is just one long decimal. So that the map knows what we're talking about, this will need to be set to decimal. All right, cool. So we've got 2 inputs. That's all the map needs to be able to place that marker. We have a button. Let's see how this works. Let's go to, I've clicked the button. I'm going to go to edit the workflow. And this is our workflow here. So you'll see step 1 here is add a marker to our map box. Before we do that, let's just have a look here what we're dealing with. So I'm going to add I'm not actually going to add an action, but let's see what we have here. Under element actions and then MapBox Map, you'll see just how many actions we have here to play around with our map plugin. This is powerful, and you can do a lot of things with more advanced workflows and more advanced functionality with the app. So documentation is your best friend here, but for now, the only one we're going to work with to add our first marker is to add a marker MapBox A. Looking good. All right, so I'll click that. What are we playing with here in terms of parameters? So the main things that it's going to need from us is the latitude and longitude of this spot. So what I've set it to is the input latitudes value and the input longitudes value, which we saw here. This is our input latitude, this is our input longitude, both set to decimal as our format. Great, that'll add their spot, the marker. But to actually move the map there, we have another action called fly to, and then MapBox Map. And it'll ask, where do you want to go? And I've set it again to the input latitudes value and the input longitudes value from our pop-up so that it matches exactly where our marker just was. And we can set the speed and how fast we zoom into the thing, zoom into the marker, how close we zoom in. So we can actually have it fly over and zoom much closer if we like. We can change the pitch and angle of the map as it zooms. That's what all of these do here. So a lot of flexibility with how this actually moves and works. But let's keep it simple like this for now. Let's see what happens when we actually do the workflow. So I'll refresh the page. I'm going to click add a marker. And in latitude, I'll put in this latitude here. And in longitude, I'll put in this longitude here. And I'll click add marker, and it'll fly across. It'll add the marker and then fly the map across to where that marker is. There we go. I've added it to a beach here in Sydney. Now you'll see our marker is this little marker here with a little burger icon. So that's the default that comes with the plugin here. But you'll see we can also control all of those visuals. So we can put in a static image as our marker. We can have a dynamic image from a database for our marker. We can have the size of the marker and the marker ID and name and description and all sorts of customization there. I'll leave it for default now so we can have a look at the next one. If I go back to our design tab, and I'm going to close this pop-up, and I will open up pop-up B. Now this is our draggable marker. Very, very similar to what we just saw with the previous pop-up. We have an input for latitude, an input for longitude, and then a button to add a draggable marker. Again, the format is set to decimal, and let's have a look at our workflow. I'll select the button, I'll click Edit Workflow, and you'll see this workflow is very, very similar to our last workflow. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the last 2 actions in our last workflow. The only other actions I have here are hide the pop-up and reset the pop-up. Very standard bubble actions, just so that the inputs clear themselves ready for if I want to add another marker and another marker. So they're the 4 steps. Add a marker, hide the pop-up, go to the marker, and then reset the pop-up. The order doesn't need to be in that order, but yes. All right, so let's have a look at our draggable marker. Again, very, very similar. We have adding a marker, we have hiding the pop-up, resetting the pop-up, and then flying to the marker, except our action here is create a draggable marker this time. And you'll see once I click that, the options over here are quite similar to what we just saw. We have the longitude and the latitude. Now it's called default longitude and latitude now because this is the starting point of this marker, as this marker is going to move around as we, the user, move it around. Cool. Let's see what it looks like. And again, we have all the options for custom images for markers and dynamic images and things like that. But let's keep it default and let's see what we end up with. I'll refresh the page. This time I'll click Add Draggable Marker. I'll put in our latitude, and I will put in our longitude here. We fly across to our marker. We have a slightly different looking marker now, though. And this one we can pick up, and we can move around and place wherever we want on the map, and then have subsequent things happen within our app based on the position of the new position of this marker as we move it around. Cool, looking good. All right, so that's adding a marker, that's adding a draggable marker. How do we get markers into the app by default, or into the map by default? So what I've done here, if I zoom out, each time the page loads, it loads these markers here. Again, with our little burger icon, default icon. But I've got 3 markers in this area here. What's happening there? So what I've done here, on page load, I've told the map to load these markers, and it's pulling them from the database. So let's check that first. I'm going to go to my data tab, and I go to my data types. And I've added a data type called map marker. And in this map marker data type, I've added fields for latitude, longitude, and title, and kept latitude and longitude as number formats. So if we go to our app data tab, I've then added 3 different map markers in them, the markers we're seeing on our map. For each of these, I have added in the longitude and latitude of where they are. As you can tell, they're all very close together. And these will be the markers that are placed on our map as the page loads. So let's look at the workflow to actually have them load as the page loads. We'll go to my workflow tab here. And this is the workflow here when page is loaded. When the page is loaded, I want something to happen. I want to add a list of markers to our MapBox map. Now, let's see what we end up with this. So I'll click on this action. And the first thing it says is, which map do you want this to apply to? We only have 1 map on our page, but if you had multiple, you would specify it in this drop down here. Now the markers type, we want to specify map marker from our database. This is the data type we just set up, map marker. So I will choose that there. The markers source, where is it sourcing these markers from? So I've told it to search for map markers. That's again the data type we have. Do a search for all the map markers in our database. Now, because we only have 3, it's only finding those 3. If we had many more in different types and categories, we could put some constraints on and say only map markers that could be whatever we want in a certain category, made after a certain date, with a certain kind of marker on them that specifies from this city or something like that. But for now, I've just kept it to all our map markers because we only have the 3. ID field, we want to set this to the unique ID of the database entry, just so that the map has all of these as individual items. And then here, this is how we specify where each marker is placed with the latitude and longitude. So we want to specify these, we want to do a search for the map markers, and then for each result we find, get us latitude. So that looks like, the formula looks like search for map marker, each item's lat, and lat being this here, lat, in our data type. So we specified that field, and now we can use that field to use that specification to grab the field's value. So yes, for latitude field, search for map markers, each item's lat. For longitude field, search for map markers. So look at all the map markers, then for each item we find, get its longitude. It's long that we called in the database. All right, that's all we would need for these. Again, we can put in an icon and an image to make this branded to our app and look a lot more visually coherent with our app. But let's leave those defaults for now. Let's refresh the page, and now that we know what's happening with this workflow, we can actually know what's going on. So when the page loads, it's going to search our database for all the map markers. It's going to search for each item's latitude and each item's longitude, and then it's going to place all of those onto the map. Let's load and check it out. I mean, we won't see much happening because it happens on page load, but if we zoom out, there are our 3 spots. And they have their names, place 1, place 2, and place 3. Cool. Now our last buttons along here, turning 3D buildings on and off, and 3D mode on and off. So just a refresher. Actually, I'm going to go back to the city for this because there are not many 3D buildings over on the beach. All right, so we have 3D buildings on and off, and 3D mode on and off. How does that work? So that's actually very, very simple with this plugin. Let me hide this pop-up and I will select the button. Whoop, boop, boop, boop. There we go. Okay, so turning 3D buildings on, what's the workflow? It's literally just turn 3D buildings on the map. It's that easy. We can specify the color, which is nice. We can make this branded and fit and customize it to our app's branding. And turning 3D buildings off is exactly the same. Turn 3D buildings off in our MapBox map. Now, our other buttons are 3D mode on and off. Now, I've just called this 3D mode because that's a nice, understandable term for our users. But in our plugin, this is called the pitch. This is the pitch of the map. What angle is the map angled to? So when button 3D mode on is clicked, I've set it to set the pitch of our MapBox map to 70 degrees. Now, we always have our documentation under here that we can see more information about each option in these properties panels. So for here, it tells us the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 90. We're just looking at angles here. And then so I've set it to 70, so sort of in between. And then for turning 3D mode off, that button, clicking that, sets the pitch back to 0. Nice and simple. All right, those are our key basic workflows that I've set up in this. There are a few other things to have a look at though, so let's check those out. Okay, so we won't be building these from scratch today, but I did want to highlight a few features here in the demo app that's built on Zeroqode, as there are some really cool more advanced things you can be doing with this plugin that'll, add a lot of power and functionality to your app when you're integrating this map. Now, all of these are controlled by workflows that are all specified in the documentation. So have a play around with this demo app, have a play around with the documentation and see how to implement each of these workflows individually. But the main ones I wanted to mention, styles here. You can allow your user to dynamically change the style of the map within your app through the front-end actions here. You can change the light mode, dark mode, you can change the satellite mode, and then you have an option as well, a workflow to reset all of that back to default. Okay, so clusters is another one here. So you would have seen in the last example, we added 3 different locations, markers on the map. And when zoomed out, they kind of just melded together into one blob, and it was a bit hard to understand. So clusters is the solution for that. So I'll click cluster here in the example app, and I will click add clusters. And you'll see it's added 3 different clusters. We've got 4 here, 3 here, and 3 here. If we zoom in closer on these 3, you'll see at a certain point we get closer and each of them separate out of their own locations. And if we zoom out again, they'll group back together into their cluster. Very useful if your application and your map has a lot of points of interest, a lot of markers all in a small area. And you want to make sure that it's still legible and readable when you zoom further out on the map. And there's a bunch more in here as well. You've got tools for measuring distance between locations and drawing directly on the map, adding your own location to the map. You've got layers in with heat map layers and different video layers. You've got a bunch of options for routes. So, the camera angle and the animation of different routes along the map. There's a lot here. It's super powerful. So have a play around with this demo app. Have a play around with the editor version of this demo app to see how it's all set up, and have a look at the documentation as well for more advanced use cases with this. But that's it for this video. I hope this is helpful. I hope this got you set up with the basics of using the MapBox Map plugin. But if you have any questions about any of this and getting this set up in your app, don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to help you out. Until then, happy building.